Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the colony ship New Terra and watched the alien ships surround them. 3 massive Zephyrian vessels blocked their path to the Kepler system, where 15,000 human colonists waited for supplies that would keep them alive through winter. The aliens had painted their ships in the red and gold colors that meant they came to collect tribute from humans. Jake had seen this before. For 50 years, the Zephyrians and their allies had treated humans like children who needed constant watching. They took the best planets for themselves and pushed humans to the edge of space where nothing grew easily. They made rules that humans had to follow, but gave them no voice in making those rules. They demanded payments in food and metal and fuel that left human colonies barely alive. The communication screen lit up with the face of a Zephyrian commander. His skin was gray like stone and his eyes were black without any white showing. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding metal. He said his name was War Leader Kess and that the humans owed the Coalition 1,000 tons of processed food and 500 tons of refined metals. Jake felt his hands shake with anger but kept his voice calm. The colonists on Kepler had already given everything they could spare. Another tribute payment would mean people would starve before spring came. He told the alien commander that the humans had no more to give. War Leader Kess made a sound that might have been laughter. He said humans always had more to give when properly motivated. He ordered Jake to surrender the cargo or face the consequences. The alien ships moved closer, and Jake could see their weapons charging with blue light. Jake thought about his daughter Amy, who was down in the colony on Kepler, learning to grow food in the thin soil. He thought about all the children who would die if winter came without enough supplies. He thought about 50 years of his people being pushed around by aliens who saw them as nothing, more than animals to be used. He told War Leader Kess that the New Terra would not surrender its cargo. The alien commander showed his teeth in what humans had learned. Was not a smile but a threat display. He said humans needed to learn their place in the galaxy. The first energy blast hit the escort ship Courage and turned it into burning metal and screaming voices. Captain Helen Brooks and her crew of 90 died in seconds. The second blast destroyed the transport vessel Hope. 412 civilians were on that ship, including 60 children under 10 years old. Jake watched the ship break apart and felt something break inside himself as well. These were not military targets, but defenseless people carrying seeds and medicine and books for the colony. War Leader Kess spoke again and said this was what happened when humans forgot to obey their betters. He demanded the cargo again and said the next shot would hit New Terra itself. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Navigation Officer Carol Turner had tears in her eyes, but her hands were steady on her controls. Weapons Officer Dan Parker waited for orders, even though they all knew their small defense guns could not hurt the massive alien ships. Communications Officer Lisa Kane was recording everything to send to Earth if they lived long enough. Jake activated the emergency beacon that would carry their story across space to every human settlement. He told his crew to prepare for battle even though they all knew it meant death. He said humans had bent the knee long enough and maybe it was time to stand up straight even if it killed them. War Leader Kess fired on New Terra, but Jake had turned the ship so. The blast hit their empty cargo bay instead of the crew sections. The ship shook and people fell, but they were still alive. Jake ordered all power to engines and they ran toward the Kepler colony with the alien ships chasing them. They reached the planet but barely. New Terra crash-landed in a field outside the main settlement, and Jake's people helped the colonists prepare for the alien attack they knew would come. But something strange happened. The Zephyrian ships stopped at the edge of the system and waited as if they had received new orders. Earth Admiral Lisa Kane sat in the command center and listened to the recording from New Terra. She had been waiting 20 years for this moment, when the aliens finally pushed too hard. The massacre at Kepler was exactly what the secret planners had said would happen eventually. She activated communication links that had been hidden for decades. Across human space, people got messages they had been waiting for their whole lives. Dr. Martin Cruz in his laboratory on Mars stopped pretending to research farming equipment and opened the sealed doors that led to weapons the aliens did not know existed. President Helen Adams walked into the United Earth Assembly and told the representatives that humanity would no longer bow to alien masters. The room erupted in cheers and fear as people realized this meant war against enemies who controlled most of the galaxy. Captain Ryan Torres led rescue ships to Kepler and helped evacuate the colonists who could not fight. As they worked, he broadcast the images of the destroyed ships across all human networks. Every settlement saw the burning wreckage and the bodies floating in space and understood that talking time was over. The Zephyrians had made their biggest mistake. They thought fear would keep humans obedient forever. They did not understand that humans had been preparing for this day, and that once pushed too far, humans became something very different from the frightened animals the aliens thought they ruled. War was coming and humanity was ready. General Paul Martinez looked at the battle maps covering the walls of his underground command center and felt satisfaction at how perfectly the plans were working. 6 months of war had turned from desperate defense into systematic conquest as human forces attacked 17 Zephyrian systems at the same time. The aliens were learning what humans had always known about fighting against impossible odds. You hit the enemy where they don't expect it, and you never give them time to recover from one attack before the next one begins. You make them afraid of shadows and jump it. Sounds that might be nothing at all, Admiral. Lisa Kane stood on the bridge of her flagship, Liberty, and watched Zephyrian ships run from human forces for the first time in galactic history. The alien commanders who had ruled space through fear and superior technology now faced enemies who understood both better than they did themselves. Dr. Elena Brooks had perfected her greatest creation in the laboratories beneath Mars. The device that human pilots called the Equalizer could reach into the quantum foundations of matter and make Zephyrian energy shields simply stop working. The aliens thought their defenses were invincible until they tried to stop human weapons and found nothing there. Captain Rick Turner flew the first combat test of the Equalizer during the Battle of Proxima Station, where a Zephyrian fleet had trapped human colonists on the planet's surface. The aliens watched their mighty shields flicker and die as Rick's fighter approached their command ship like death wearing human skin. The Zephyrian Admiral tried to retreat but found his engines failing as human computer viruses spread through his ship's systems. Rick put a missile through the bridge and ended 50 years of alien arrogance with one perfect shot. The remaining alien ships scattered like frightened children when they realized their technology could no longer protect them. Lieutenant Sam Mitchell led his Marine squad through the corridors of the captured Zephyrian dreadnought Eternal Dominance and marveled at how easily the aliens broke when faced with real fighting. These were the same species that had conquered dozens of worlds, but they crumbled when enemies fought back with weapons they understood. The intelligence Sam's team captured from the alien flagship revealed something that made human commanders smile with anticipation. The Zephyrians had concentrated most of their shipbuilding capacity in the Vega system, where they believed no enemy could reach them. They were about to learn how wrong overconfidence could make even advanced civilizations. Kate Johnson worked 18-hour days converting human merchant ships into fighting vessels with weapons that could hurt alien warships. Her husband, Bill, developed field modifications that let human technology work in environments where Zephyrian equipment failed completely. The civilian conversion program created an improvised navy that supported the professional military forces. Cargo haulers became missile platforms and passenger liners became troop transports that could land armies on planets the aliens thought were safe. Behind their defensive lines, Kate's proudest creation was the converted mining barge New Hope that could carry enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. The ship looked harmless from outside, but contained weapon systems that Elena's team had designed specifically to kill overconfident aliens who thought humans were still helpless. The Battle of New Haven became the turning point where human forces proved they were no longer fighting for survival but for victory. Admiral Kane brought every ship humanity could field into a massive engagement that would either win the war or end human resistance forever. The Zephyrian fleet outnumbered the humans 3-1, and their ships were larger and more heavily armed. But human commanders had studied alien tactics for decades and knew exactly how their enemies would deploy for battle. The aliens did everything their doctrine required and walked into a trap that had been prepared for 20 years. Elena's weapon systems turned superior alien technology into expensive junk that could not protect the crews inside. Tony's hidden missile batteries emerged from asteroids and space debris to hit Zephyrian ships from directions they never thought to guard. Amy's computer viruses infected alien command networks and turned their own systems against them. Admiral Thelmos commanded the alien fleet with the confidence of someone who had never lost a major battle. He deployed his ships in the formation that had conquered 100 worlds and activated energy shields that had never failed to stop enemy weapons then. Human reality hit alien expectations like a hammer hitting glass. Thelmos watched his invincible fleet dissolve under weapons fire that should not have been possible. Humans were supposed to be primitives who barely understood basic technology, but they were fighting with equipment that seemed almost magical. The alien admiral tried to signal retreat, but found his communication systems infected with viruses that turned his orders into poetry about human determination. His flagship weapons turned on his own escort ships while enemy fighters danced through his defensive fire like they could see the future. Commander Julia Foster led the Ghost Fleet in the final assault that broke alien resistance completely. Her ships appeared from stealth, positions that Zephyrian sensors had never detected, and delivered killing blows to targets that thought themselves safely protected by superior technology. The battle ended with alien ships fleeing in panic while human forces captured or destroyed everything too slow to run away. For the first time since the war began, a major Zephyrian commander had abandoned the field of battle and left his forces to die rather than face human weapons. Captain Steve Morgan's unit pursued the fleeing aliens and made sure that word of the defeat spread throughout Zephyrian space. Fear was a weapon that humans had learned to use as effectively as missiles and energy beams. An enemy who expected defeat would often provide it without much fighting. General Martinez received reports from across human space about alien forces retreating from positions they had held for decades. The psychological impact of losing at New Haven was spreading through the Zephyrian military like a virus that destroyed morale and fighting effectiveness. President Adams addressed the United Earth Assembly and announced that humanity was no longer fighting for survival but for victory and justice. The representatives cheered as she declared that human forces would pursue the aliens back to their home systems and teach them what it meant to push peaceful people too far. Dr. Cruz activated sleeper agents in alien territory who began sabotaging Zephyrian infrastructure and spreading propaganda that encouraged other oppressed species to rise up against their masters. The coalition that had ruled the galaxy through fear was learning that terror could work both ways. The tide of war had turned completely. Aliens who had thought themselves masters of the universe were running from humans they had dismissed as barely intelligent animals. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humanity decided that freedom was worth any price, and victory was the only acceptable outcome. Dr. Elena Brooks walked through the hidden corridors beneath the asteroid mining station and smiled at what the aliens had never bothered to look for. They thought humans were too stupid to hide anything important and too weak to build real weapons. 20 years of careful planning was about to prove them wrong. The mining station looked normal from outside with its boring gray buildings and slow-moving equipment. Zephyrian inspectors had visited many times and seen exactly what they expected to see: humans digging rocks and processing metals like good little servants. They never looked deeper because they believed their own lies about human limitations. But 3 miles underground, Elena and her team had built something that would make the aliens very unhappy. Tony Mitchell stood beside a massive gun barrel that stretched for half a mile through the asteroid rock. The weapon could fire projectiles fast enough to punch through any armor the Zephyrians had ever built. Amy Watson sat at computer terminals that controlled manufacturing systems the size of city blocks. While the aliens thought humans were mining iron and copper, they had really been building weapons and ships and ammunition for the war everyone knew would come eventually. Elena remembered the day 20 years ago when Admiral Kane had visited her university lab and asked if she wanted to help prepare humanity for freedom. Elena had been young then and angry about all the restrictions aliens put on human research. She said yes without thinking twice about the dangers. The project started small with a few scientists in hidden labs asking questions about physics the aliens said humans were too primitive to understand. They learned that Zephyrian energy shields worked by bending space around their ships, but the process created tiny gaps that lasted for microseconds. Human computers were fast enough to calculate when those gaps would appear. Tony had been a military engineer before the aliens banned humans from having real armies. He knew how to build things that exploded and how to make them explode exactly where you wanted them to. He spent 15 years designing weapons that looked like mining equipment until you turned them on. Amy had grown up with computers and could make them do things that amazed even other humans. She learned to write programs that could think faster than alien minds and see patterns that biological brains missed entirely. Her virus codes were works of art that could turn enemy systems against themselves. Colonel Nathan Price arrived at the asteroid base with news from Earth. The attack on New Terra had triggered the activation of sleeper cells throughout human space. Ordinary farmers and mechanics and teachers were opening sealed packages that contained weapons and communication, gear and orders they had memorized years. Aga Nathan commanded the Ghost Fleet, which was humanity's secret weapon. The ships looked like small cargo vessels, but they were built with technology stolen from alien wrecks and improved by human creativity. They could become invisible to Zephyrian sensors by hiding in the background radiation that filled space. Commander Julia Foster walked onto the bridge of the ship Retribution and felt pride at what her people had accomplished in secret. The vessel had more firepower than a Zephyrian heavy cruiser, but was small enough to hide behind a large asteroid. More importantly, it was crewed by humans who had been waiting their whole lives to fight back. The first test of their secret weapons came when a Zephyrian patrol found a human supply convoy near the Vega system. Captain Steve Morgan led his squadron of Ghost Fleet ships in an attack that the aliens never saw coming. The human ships appeared from nowhere and destroyed the patrol so quickly that no distress signals were sent. Steve made sure there were no survivors. This was not cruelty, but tactics learned from studying alien psychology. The Zephyrians were used to winning every fight and having enemies surrender rather than die. When their ships simply vanished without explanation, it created fear and confusion in their command structure. Dr. Cruz activated the weapon, production lines that had been disguised as farming equipment for 2 decades. Machines that aliens thought made fertilizer actually manufactured explosive warheads. Systems that processed grain really built guidance. Computers for missiles that could think for themselves. The aliens had been so confident in their control that they never bothered to really understand human technology. They saw simple machines and assumed simple minds built them. They missed the quantum processors hidden in farming robots and the communication arrays disguised as weather monitoring stations. President Adams met with her war council in rooms that the aliens thought were used for discussing trade agreements. General Paul Martinez spread out battle plans that had been prepared for 20 years while Admiral Kane coordinated with secret bases throughout human space. The Zephyrian High Council received reports of missing patrols and strange incidents, but dismissed them as minor problems. Supreme Commander Veltar told his staff that humans were probably conducting small, terrorist attacks that would stop when properly punished. He sent Admiral Crixon with a standard pacification fleet to remind humans why they should stay obedient. The alien commander had crushed dozens of rebellions using fear and overwhelming force. He expected the humans to surrender after seeing the size of his armada. But humans had spent 50 years studying every Zephyrian tactic, and 20 years preparing counters for each one. When Crixon arrived at the Jupiter system, he found what looked like a few desperate defense ships trying to protect the orbital colonies. Elena watched from her command center as the battle began exactly as the planners had predicted. The Zephyrian ships moved in their standard attack formation and activated energy shields that had never failed them before. They prepared to demonstrate why aliens ruled the galaxy and humans served them. Then Tony's hidden gun batteries opened fire from positions throughout the asteroid belt. Projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed hit Zephyrian shields at precisely calculated moments when quantum gaps made them vulnerable. Amy's computer viruses infected alien targeting systems and turned their weapons against each other. Admiral Crixon watched his mighty fleet break apart under attacks that should have been impossible. Humans were supposed to be weak and stupid and helpless. They were not supposed to have weapons that could destroy ships that had conquered 100 worlds. The last thing he saw was Commander Foster's ship Retribution dropping its stealth field as it approached his flagship. The human vessel looked tiny compared to the massive alien dreadnought, but the torpedo it fired was built with 20 years of accumulated hatred and brilliant engineering. When the smoke cleared, the Zephyrian pacification fleet was nothing but wreckage drifting in space. For the first time in their history, the aliens had lost a major battle to the species they considered barely intelligent animals. Elena smiled and began preparing for the next phase of humanity's war for freedom. General Paul Martinez authorized the deep strike missions that would carry human forces into the heart of Zephyrian space and teach the aliens what it felt like to have their homes threatened by enemies they had created through decades of cruelty and oppression. Colonel Nathan Price expanded the Ghost Fleet into a force that could attack anywhere in the galaxy without warning. His ships moved through space like invisible predators hunting prey that had grown fat and lazy from too many years of easy victory over weaker enemies. The Zephyrian core worlds had never faced attack in their 1,000-year history of conquest. Their populations lived in cities without walls, and their defense forces were scattered across the galaxy, holding down rebellious species that the Coalition had enslaved. Captain Rick Turner led the first human raid on Zephyr Secondary, when his squadron materialized from stealth positions above the planet and destroyed the orbital shipyards that built half the alien fleet. The locals watched their sky fill with fire and realized that safety was an illusion that war could shatter in minutes. Dr. Martin Cruz implemented Project Prometheus, which turned the Coalition's own member species against each other by exploiting political tensions that humans had been studying for decades while pretending to be ignorant servants who understood nothing about galactic politics. Agent Sarah Mitchell had spent 15 years infiltrating Zephyrian diplomatic circles by pretending to be a harmless human translator who was too stupid to understand the important conversations happening around her. The aliens never suspected that she was recording every word and analyzing their weaknesses. Sarah planted carefully crafted intelligence reports that made the Krillian Empire believe the Zephyrians were planning to absorb their territory after the human rebellion was crushed. She convinced the hegemony of Tal that their Zephyrian allies were secretly negotiating surrender terms that would leave them defenseless against human revenge. The Coalition began tearing itself apart as member species that had been allies for centuries started believing that their partners were planning betrayal. Fear and suspicion spread through the alliance like poison, while human forces advanced deeper into territory that should have been protected by united enemies. Captain Ryan Torres commanded the destroyer Vengeance during the daring raid on the Coalition's central communication hub in the Alpha Centauri system. His team included demolitions expert Frank Lewis, who could make anything explode, and systems analyst Rachel Cooper, who understood alien computer networks better than their designers. The communication hub controlled military coordination across the entire Coalition fleet and intelligence networks that had kept rebellious species under surveillance for generations. Frank's explosives destroyed the physical infrastructure while Rachel's viruses corrupted the backup systems and spread chaos throughout alien command structures. Zephyrian admirals found themselves cut off from their fleets with no way to coordinate operations against human forces that seemed to appear everywhere at once. Ancient species that the Coalition had oppressed for centuries began revolting when they realized their masters could no longer call for help. Colonel Amy Rodriguez ran intelligence operations that analyzed the psychological breakdown spreading through alien military forces. Warriors who had considered themselves invincible were showing signs of trauma and fear that human doctors recognized from their own soldiers after terrible battles. The Krillian Third Fleet mutinied against their Zephyrian commanders when orders arrived to sacrifice themselves, defending a system that contained no Krillian colonies. The hegemony of Tal recalled their ships from Coalition service to defend their home systems against imaginary human threats that Sarah's propaganda had convinced them were real. Supreme Commander Veltar watched his alliance crumble as member species abandoned their posts or turned their weapons on each other. The iron discipline that had held the Coalition together for a millennium was melting under pressure from enemies who understood psychological warfare better than the aliens understood themselves. Veltar tried to negotiate a ceasefire through diplomatic channels that he hoped could stop the human advance before it reached the core systems where Zephyrian civilization had been built over thousands of years. His messages spoke of mutual understanding and peaceful coexistence between species that had more in common than their differences. President Helen Adams received the alien peace overtures in the White House Situation Room, where her War Council was planning the final phase of human victory. Secretary of Defense Peter Collins advised accepting the negotiations to save human lives, but Adams remembered 50 years of humiliation and oppression that demanded justice. She rejected every Zephyrian offer and demanded complete withdrawal from all contested systems, plus reparations that would take the aliens generations to pay. The Coalition had shown no mercy when humans begged for fair treatment, and would receive none now that the balance of power had shifted. Admiral Lisa Kane led the combined human fleet toward Zephyr Prime itself, as alien resistance collapsed on every front. The Ghost Fleet had destroyed the outer system defenses, and computer viruses had disabled most of the planetary shields that protected the Coalition capital. General Martinez coordinated ground forces that would soon land on an alien homeworld for the first time in galactic history. Human Marines who had trained for decades in secret bases were finally going to show their enemies what happened when peaceful people were pushed beyond endurance. The psychological impact on Coalition forces became total collapse when news reached them that human ships were approaching Zephyr Prime. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds for their empire began deserting, rather than face enemies who had turned from victims into predators. Captain Steve Morgan reported that entire alien fleets were surrendering without fighting when human forces appeared in their systems. The reputation of human weapons and tactics had spread throughout Coalition space and created terror that was more effective than any physical weapon. Tony Mitchell's engineering teams worked around the clock to modify captured alien shipyards for human use. The industrial capacity that had built the Coalition fleet would soon be producing weapons for humanity's continued expansion into space that rightfully belonged to free species rather than galactic empires. Amy Watson developed new computer viruses specifically designed to corrupt Zephyrian government databases and erase records of their crimes against humanity and other species. When the war ended, there would be no official documentation of Coalition atrocities for future historians to minimize or excuse. Elena Brooks prepared her ultimate weapon for the final battle that would decide whether humans became the galaxy's new masters or remained forever trapped in the role of rebellious slaves who had briefly risen above their station before being crushed by superior forces. The device could destabilize the quantum foundations of matter itself and turn advanced alien technology into useless metal that could not protect the creatures who had built their empire on the suffering of others. It was justice and revenge, and liberation all wrapped in physics equations that aliens had taught themselves were too complex for human minds. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey was learning that predators could be eaten by more dangerous creatures that they had foolishly mistaken for harmless animals that could be safely ignored or casually abused. Admiral Lisa Kane stood on the bridge of the flagship Liberty and watched the greatest fleet in human history approach Zephyr Prime, where the Coalition had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. Every ship carried weapons built from decades of accumulated anger and crews who remembered every insult and humiliation their species had endured. The planet below them was the heart of an empire that stretched across thousands of star systems and controlled the lives of billions of beings who had never chosen to be subjects of alien masters. Today, humanity would break that empire forever and teach the galaxy that freedom was not a gift to be granted by superior beings. General Paul Martinez coordinated ground forces from the assault carrier New Earth as his troops prepared for the first human invasion of an alien homeworld. These were Marines who had trained in secret for 20 years while pretending to be farmers and miners and factory workers under alien supervision. Dr. Elena Brooks activated her ultimate weapon from the command ship Retribution and felt the universe itself respond to human will. The device reached into the quantum foundations of reality and told Zephyrian technology to simply stop working, as physics bent to the determination of a species that refused to accept defeat. The Coalition's proud battle fleet became floating debris in minutes as their energy shields collapsed and their weapon systems shut down permanently. Ships that had conquered hundreds of worlds drifted helpless in space while human fighters moved between them like sharks among wounded fish. Supreme Commander Veltar watched his invincible armada die without firing a shot, and understood that the universe had changed in ways his species could never undo. The humans who had begged for mercy 50 years ago were now gods of war who commanded forces beyond alien comprehension. Colonel Dan Parker led the first Marine assault on Zephyrian soil as dropships landed in the capital city where no foreign enemy had ever set foot. The aliens who had considered themselves the galaxy's master race ran through their streets screaming as human soldiers advanced with weapons that turned their defensive technology into expensive decorations. Major Lisa Turner directed urban combat operations through city districts, where alien civilians cowered in buildings that could no longer protect them from enemies their government had created. through decades of systematic cruelty. The humans showed mercy to non-combatants but none to the military forces that had enforced oppression. Commander Nathan Price deployed the Ghost Fleet to prevent any escape attempts by coalition leadership, who might try to flee to hidden bases in unknown systems. His ships surrounded Zephyr Prime like an invisible net that would catch anyone foolish enough to think they could run from human justice. The fighting was fierce but brief, as Zephyrian ground forces discovered that their training and equipment meant nothing against enemies who had studied their weaknesses for generations. Human tactics that combined superior technology with intimate knowledge of alien psychology crushed resistance with surgical precision. Captain Rick Turner flew close air support missions over the capital city and marveled at how completely the balance of power had shifted. The beings who had ruled the galaxy through fear were now the ones experiencing terror as their comfortable world burned around them. Frank Lewis and his demolitions team systematically destroyed the government buildings where coalition policies had been made for centuries. Each explosion erased another piece of the bureaucratic machinery that had oppressed countless species and reduced proud civilizations to slavery. Rachel Cooper infiltrated the central computer networks and began downloading the complete records of coalition crimes against humanity and every other species they had conquered. The evidence would ensure that future generations remembered who the real monsters had been during the dark years of alien rule. Supreme Commander Veltar personally surrendered to Admiral Kane aboard the human flagship when he realized that further resistance would only result in more death for his people. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, so every species could see that the seemingly invincible coalition had been utterly defeated. The Treaty of New Terra was negotiated by Ambassador Carol Turner, who had lost family members in the early massacres that started the war. She showed the same mercy that aliens had given humans during 50 years of oppression, which was to say, none at all until the defeated enemies agreed to terms that guaranteed they could never threaten anyone again. Secretary of State Robert Chen worked with human diplomats to establish a new galactic order, based on the radical idea that all intelligent species deserved freedom and self-determination. The vast coalition bureaucracy would be dismantled and its member species allowed to govern themselves for the first time in centuries. President Helen Adams addressed the United Nations and the galaxy simultaneously, as she announced that humanity had achieved complete victory, but would use their power more wisely than the aliens who had preceded them. Earth would lead by example rather than ruling through fear and oppression. The now promoted Admiral Jake Harrison commanded the first human deep space exploration mission to regions beyond coalition territory, where unknown civilizations might exist. His ships carried messages of friendship rather than demands for submission, as humanity began its expansion as liberators instead of conquerors. Dr. Elena Brooks established the Galactic Research Institute to share human technological innovations with former enemy species who wanted to rebuild their civilizations on foundations of cooperation rather than domination. Knowledge that had been hoarded by the coalition would belong to everyone. General Martinez oversaw the transition from wartime military operations to peacetime exploration and defense as human forces spread throughout the galaxy to protect newly liberated worlds from the chaos that followed the collapse of ancient political structures. Captain Kevin Wright led the first colony mission to the Andromeda Galaxy, where humanity would establish settlements beyond the reach of any remaining alien threats. His ship carried families who wanted to build new worlds where their children would grow up free from the fear that had defined human existence for 2 generations. Commander Susan Davis commanded the escort fleet that would protect the Andromeda colonists during their long journey between galaxies. Her vessels were armed with weapons that could destroy anything the universe might send against them, but she hoped they would never be needed. The final scene of humanity's war for freedom showed Earth's children departing for distant stars as ambassadors and explorers rather than refugees and slaves. The species that had once begged for scraps from alien tables now owned the entire galaxy and was generous enough to share it with everyone who chose cooperation over conquest. Tony Mitchell supervised the construction of new shipyards that would build vessels for exploration and trade rather than war and oppression. The industrial capacity that had once served alien masters would now help humanity and their allies reach for dreams that had seemed impossible during the dark years. Amy Watson developed communication networks that would connect every free world in a web of cooperation and mutual support. Information would flow freely between species who had been kept isolated by their former masters to prevent them from combining against coalition rule. The war was over and humanity had won more completely than anyone had dared to hope. But the real victory was not military conquest, but the knowledge that free people could overcome any tyranny if they were willing to pay the price that freedom demanded. The galaxy belonged to everyone now, and the future belonged to species brave enough to reach for it.